The woman you've loved for 34 years is lying in a hospital bed. She can't move, can't speak, can't open her eyes, and the last thing she ever said to you, the last word she spoke with her own mouth, was a promise. She made you promise, and the law says you can't keep it. What do? Because I know what I did, and they gave me 10 years for it. My name is James Robert Holloway. I'm 76 years old. Been in this place 8 years now. My hands used to run a paper press, 40-ton machine, 6 days a week, 31 years. These hands built a house, changed diapers, fixed a leaky faucet at 2 a.m. because Ruth Ann said the drip was keeping her up. Now these hands, they shake when I hold a coffee cup. The state of Tennessee says these hands committed second-degree murder. Second-degree murder. That's what they call it when a husband holds his wife's hand and lets her go. I call it something else. I call it a promise. I met Ruth Ann in the spring of 1984. April. Cherry blossoms were out on Chapman Highway, and she was standing outside a Dairy Queen with a vanilla cone that was melting down her wrist. I handed her a napkin. She looked at me like I'd handed her a diamond ring, and I thought, that's the woman I'm going to marry. Just like that. Standing in a parking lot with a melting ice cream cone. We married that October, 34 years. You hear that number and you think you know what it means. You don't. 34 years is, it's 12,000 mornings of waking up next to the same person. It's learning how she takes her coffee, half a sugar, not a whole one. 'Cause she'd say, James, I don't need the whole sugar, I just need the idea of it. She was like that. Ruth Ann was the kind of woman who'd put a blanket on you when you fell asleep on the couch watching football, and she'd leave your boots by the door so you didn't have to look for them in the morning. Little things. 34 years of little things. That's what a marriage is. Not the big moments, the little things. We had 2 kids. Sarah, she's the oldest. Got her mama's eyes and her mama's stubbornness. And David's the quiet one. Got my chin and my temper, though he'd never admit it. The accident was March 14th, 2016, a Tuesday. Ruth Ann was driving home from the grocery store. She had 2 bags in the back seat, chicken thighs, green beans, and a lemon cake mix, because Sarah's birthday was that weekend. A kid, 19 years old, ran a red light on Magnolia Avenue doing 50 in a 35, hit the driver's side. Ruth Ann's head hit the window. They said she was unconscious before the car stopped spinning. She never woke up. The doctors said the word vegetative, persistent vegetative state. I didn't know what that meant at first. I thought vegetative meant temporary, like a coma in the movies. You wait, you talk to her, you hold her hand, and one day she opens her eyes. That's not what it means. It means the machines breathe for her. It means her eyes open sometimes, but there's nobody behind them. It means the woman who used to argue with me about whether the dishwasher was loaded right is lying there with a tube in her throat, and she can't tell me whether she's cold. Now here's what you need to understand. Ruth Ann, my wife, she planned for this. She did. Years before 2009, we were sitting on the porch watching the news, and there was a story about some poor woman in Florida who'd been on life support for, 15 years. And Ruth Ann turned to me and she said, James, if that ever happens to me, you pull the plug. You hear me? Don't you let me lie there like that. Promise me. I promised. She wrote it down. We both signed it. She even had her friend Dolores sign, as witness, a living will, her wishes, in her own handwriting, in blue ink, on our kitchen table. So when the accident happened, when the doctors said persistent vegetative state, I thought it'd be simple. She told me what she wanted. She wrote it down. I'd show them the paper and they'd respect her wishes. I showed the paper to the hospital. The hospital said it wasn't in the right legal format. The state of Tennessee had specific requirements for an advance directive, and Ruth Ann's letter, written at our kitchen table in her own hand, didn't meet the standard. Not the right language, not notarized, not filed with the right office. Her words, her handwriting, her signature didn't count. I hired a lawyer, a man named Kessler from downtown Knoxville. He filed a petition to honor Ruth Ann's wishes. The judge said there wasn't enough evidence that Ruth Ann was of sound mind when she wrote the directive. She wrote it in 2009, 7 years before the accident. The judge wanted proof she still felt the same way in 2016. How do you prove what a woman in a coma wants? Kessler appealed, lost again. I hired another lawyer, this one from Nashville. She said we could try a different angle. Constitutional rights, 14th Amendment. She filed in federal court. The judge dismissed it in 4 months, said the state had a legitimate interest in preserving life. Ruth Ann's interest in her own dignity didn't outweigh the state's interest in keeping her alive. 2 years, 2 lawyers, 3 courtrooms. Every single one said the same thing. The state knows better than Ruth Ann what Ruth Ann wants. And the whole time, the whole 2 years, Ruth Ann is lying in that bed. Machines breathing for her, feeding tube in her stomach, nurses turning her every 4 hours so she doesn't get bed sores. Her hair, she was so proud of her hair. Kept it nice her whole life. Her hair was thin and gray, and nobody was brushing it the way she liked. I visited every single day, every day for 2 years, 730 days. I'd sit in that chair next to her bed, and I'd hold her hand and I'd read to her. She loved James Patterson novels, not the fancy stuff, the page turners. I must have read her 20 of those books. I don't know if she heard a word, but I read them anyway, and every night I'd drive home to an empty house, and I'd sit at that kitchen table where she wrote that letter, and I'd look at her handwriting. Don't you let me lie there like that. Promise me. And I'd think, what kind of man am I? There comes a point when a man stops asking permission to do what's right. I reached that point on a Thursday night in November 2018. I'd been to the hospital that afternoon, same as every day. I walked in and there was a new nurse, young girl, maybe 25. She was changing Ruth Ann's gown and she'd left the curtain half open. My wife was lying there exposed, thin as a rail. Her arms looked like broomsticks, and this nurse had her headphones in, listening to music while she handled my wife like she was a thing, not a person, a thing. I closed the curtain, I fixed Ruth Ann's gown, I combed her hair, I sat with her for 3 hours. And when I drove home that night, I passed the courthouse. That courthouse where 3 different judges told me my wife's own words didn't matter. I looked at that building and I thought, nobody in that building ever sat beside her. Nobody in that building ever held her hand. Nobody in that building ever heard her voice, and they get to decide how she lives and how she dies. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until 4 a.m. I looked at her letter. I looked at our wedding photo on the wall. Ruth Ann and I, 1984. She's laughing because I stepped on her dress during the first dance. And I made my decision. The next night, Friday, I drove to the hospital at 11 p.m. Visiting hours were over, but the night staff knew me. 2 years of coming every day, they knew my face. The nurse at the desk, Margaret, older woman, kind, she just nodded. Let me through. I walked down that hallway. I'd walked it 700 times. I knew every crack in the tile. I knew which fluorescent light buzzed on the second floor. I knew the smell, that hospital smell that never leaves your clothes. I walked into a room, closed the door. The machines were beeping. That sound, that steady beep, I'd heard it so many times it was like a clock in our house. Just there, always there. I sat down. I took her hand. Her hand was warm. It was always warm. That was the cruelest part. Her hand felt alive. It felt like Ruth Ann. But it wasn't Ruth Ann. Ruth Ann left that body 2 years ago. What was lying in that bed was a memory the machines wouldn't let go of. I talked to her. I said, Ruthie, I don't know if you can hear me, but I made you a promise, and I've been trying to keep it the right way. I tried the courts. I tried the lawyers. I tried everything I know how to try, and none of it worked. So I'm going to keep my promise the only way I got left. I reached over and I turned off the ventilator. The beeping changed, got slower, then irregular. I held her hand. I didn't let go. I told her I loved her. I told her about Sarah's new job and David's girlfriend and how the dogwoods were going to bloom early this year because the winter was mild. And then the beeping stopped. I sat there. I don't know how long. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been an hour. I just sat there holding her hand while it got cold. The nurse found me at 1 a.m., Margaret. She walked in and she saw the machines off and she saw me sitting there holding Ruth Ann's hand. And she didn't scream. She didn't yell. She just put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Oh, James." She called the doctor. The doctor called the police. I didn't run. I didn't argue. Where was I going to go? 3 judges couldn't honor my wife's wishes. But the district attorney, he moved real fast. Arraignment in 48 hours, indictment in 3 weeks. The system that couldn't protect Ruth Ann's dignity had no trouble at all destroying mine. The trial was 4 months later, March 2019. Sarah testified for me, my daughter. She stood up there and told the jury about her mama's wishes, about the letter, about how Ruth Ann was a woman of strong opinions who knew what she wanted and said it plain. Sarah cried on the stand, but she held together. She's strong like her mother. And then David testified, my son, my boy, 29 years old. He sat across from me in that courtroom and he told the jury that I had no right to make that decision, that the courts had ruled that I took the law into my own hands, that he said I killed his mother. You want to know what broke me? It wasn't the verdict. It wasn't the sentence. It wasn't the handcuffs or the transport van or the first night in a cell. It was my son's face when he said those words, because he believed them. He looked at me, his father, and he genuinely believed I murdered his mother. And I could see in his eyes that he wasn't saying it out of anger. He was saying it out of grief. He lost his mama, and the only person he could blame was the man sitting at the defense table. The jury convicted me. 2nd-degree murder. 10 years. The prosecutor's closing argument, you know what he said? He said, Mr. Holloway may have loved his wife, but love doesn't give anyone the right to decide who lives and who dies. And half that jury nodded. I reckon he's right. Legally, he's right. I broke the law. I know that. But the law didn't sit next to Ruth Ann for 700 days. The law didn't read her James Patterson novels. The law didn't see her lying there with her gown half open and a nurse with headphones in. The law didn't make her a promise on a porch in 2009. David hasn't spoken to me since the trial. 8 years. His mama's funeral, I wasn't there. I was in county lockup waiting for sentencing. They wouldn't let me go. My wife's funeral. 34 years of marriage, and I couldn't even say goodbye at her grave. Sarah tells me David's doing well. Got married last year. A girl named, what's her name? Emily, I think. Nice girl, from what I hear. I've never met her. My son got married and I wasn't there. He might have kids someday and they won't know my name. And Ruth Ann's family, her sister Doris, her brother Carl, they stood behind David. They think I'm a murderer. Ruth Ann's own sister. The woman who was maid of honor at our wedding now tells people I killed her sister. I honored Ruth Ann's wish. That's what I did. And it cost me, my son, my freedom, my wife's funeral, and half the people I ever loved. People ask me if I have regrets. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that 3 judges couldn't see what any husband could see. I regret that my wife's own handwriting wasn't good enough for a courtroom. I regret that my son looks at me and sees a criminal instead of a father who kept his word. But do I regret walking into that room? Do I regret turning off those machines? Do I regret holding her hand while she finally got the peace she asked for? No, not for 1 second. Not for one of the 2,120 days I've been in here. I made Ruth Ann a promise, sitting on our porch watching the sunset, drinking sweet tea that she made too sweet, because she always made it too sweet. She looked me in the eye and she said, "Promise me, James." And I said, "I promise." Now I want you to listen to me, really listen. Because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, he should have waited. He should have tried another lawyer. He should have accepted what the courts decided. And maybe you're right. Maybe there was a door I didn't try. Maybe in 10 more years, somebody would have changed that law. But my wife was lying in that bed, breathing through a tube, fed through a tube, alive, if you can call it alive, because a machine said so. And every day she lay there was a day her wishes were being violated, not by me, by the system that was supposed to protect her. I want you to think about the person you love most in this world, your wife, your husband, your mama, whoever it is. And I want you to imagine that person asking you, looking you dead in the eye and asking you to promise them something, the most important thing they'll ever ask you. And then I want you to imagine that every courthouse in your state says you can't keep that promise. What would you have done? I know what I did. I kept my word. And I'd do it again, every single time, because a promise to the woman you love isn't something a judge can overrule. Ruth Ann deserved better than those machines. She deserved better than that hospital gown. She deserved to leave this world the way she wanted to. With dignity, with her husband's hand in hers. That's not murder. I don't care what the state of Tennessee says. That's marriage. I'm 76 years old. I've got 2 years left on my sentence. When I get out, I'm gonna drive to Knoxville. I'm gonna go to the cemetery on Linwood Road, and I'm gonna sit next to Ruth Ann's headstone, and I'm gonna tell her I kept my promise. And then I'm gonna call my son, and I'm gonna tell him I'm sorry, not for what I did, for what it cost him. I just miss her. That's all. I just miss my wife.